Legend of Exorcism. Chapter 35. Throwing Knives Becoming One. The light dimmed as twilight fell, and they were surrounded by Shenwu troops. Li Jinglong had to deal with that Fox Yao and protect Li Longji at the same time, so he drew out arrow after arrow and shot at the Shenwu troops that had been charmed by the Fox Yao for a bit, before aiming at that Fox Yao and shooting at it for a bit more. In that moment, he wished that he had 3 heads and 6 arms. Your Majesty! Li Jinglong turned his head back to shout. Don't come out here! Go back! Don't worry about Zhen! Li Longji yelled back. With his Son of Heaven sword in hand, wearing nothing but a dragon robe, he met the troops rushing towards him head-on, punting his own soldiers with one kick out into the corridor. How could he not worry? If the Emperor died, then the entire Great Tang would be done for. Everywhere, more troops that were not in their right minds rushed up to fight to the death, and Li Jinglong's only thought was, any god would do. Grant me some help. Hi mi ho bai, my dear comrades in arms. A whirlwind rose from flat ground, sucking up the glass tiles on the roof of Huaqing Palace, before sweeping down earth-shakingly, clearing the entirety of the plaza in front of the palace. Atai! Everyone angrily roared at the same time. Took you long enough. Li Jinglong thundered. Atai waved his fan left and right, and strong winds blew roof tiles off to fly every which way, mixing with the icy snow as it let out a huge boom, and a windstorm immediately swept through the main hall of Huaqing Palace. Right after that, Mo Rijin let out a whistle and shouted, Zhenqi! The two of them rushed out of the long corridor at the same time. Mo Rijin turned his body, loosing 7 arrows in rapid succession, which whistled towards their target. Li Jinglong finally managed to secure his arrow, and with a few steps, he stepped up onto a fallen wooden pillar, closely watching the Fox Yao's movements. Atai and Chu Yongxi had blocked the path forward of the 8-tailed fox that Lady Kuo had transformed into, and 4 of Mo Rijin's arrows blocked the Fox Yao's path of retreat. The Fox Yao let out a wild roar, spewing out balls of fire as it backed up at the same time, but the other 3 arrows shot towards its neck. In that instant the heavens and the earth fell away, and the only thing in Li Jinglong's gaze was that shining peacock feather as he fired an arrow. He then drew his bow and knocked another arrow. The first arrow shot towards that huge Fox Yao, and just as the Fox Yao had dodged Mo Rijin's arrow shafts, Li Jinglong's godly shooting schemed its neck. With a light sound, the string snapped. The Fox Yao roared, and the azure jade peacock plume fell to the ground. At the same time, Li Jinglong's second arrow flew out. That arrow's speed was extremely fast, hitting the edge of the peacock feather, and with a light ding, caused it to ricochet off and fly upwards, spinning rapidly in the air, speeding upwards to the rooftop. Hung Jun let out a loud shout, thanks. Right after that, Hung Jun slid down the tiles, sweeping by like a flying hawk, instantly catching the peacock feather rotating in midair in his grasp. The Fox Yao spewed out black flames, but Hung Jun used the pentacolor sacred light to block them, before tossing out a grappling hook. He once again flew upwards, this time to the rooftop directly across the way. The Fox Yao arched its body, rushing towards the rooftop, kicking many roof tiles into the air. With a turn of his body, Hung Jun saw the Fox Yao rushing over, and he hurried to rush rapidly along the rooftops of Huaqing Palace. Hung Jun! It's your turn, the Carp Yao shouted. When did you guys get here? Have the people here sniff the Lihun pollen? Li Jinglong found that the Carp Yao was to one side, and he hurried to shout at it. It's very expensive. Scatter it! Li Jinglong yelled. The Carp Yao, then I'm scattering it. Don't idly chit-chat, everyone shouted at the same time. Seeing that the Shenwu troops were once again rushing over, the members of the exorcism department backed up just in front of Li Longji, and the Carp Yao sprang off Atai's back. What is this? Li Longji asked in shock. The Carp Yao turned, and with a graceful carp waving its tail, scattered the Lihun pollen. Everyone hurried to hold their breaths, and the Shenwu army began to sneeze. When the Fox Yao left, the guards that were holding weapons in their hands while attacking Li Longji immediately grew confused, and under the effects of the Lihun pollen, they escaped the control of the Fox Yao. Don't scatter any towards His Majesty. Li Jinglong was afraid that as soon as Li Longji smelled the Lihun pollen, he would forget his earlier words, and Li Jinglong feared having to bring his family to ruin to pay off the damages. With the pentacolor sacred light in his left hand and the throwing knives in his left, Hung Jun rapidly leapt up onto the roof of the hall. The tiles that the Fox Yao had trod over were basically all destroyed during the chase. Hung Jun suddenly turned and stopped, his right hand spreading apart the 4 throwing knives, warily watching the Fox Yao's eyes. The Fox Yao couldn't stop trembling. Hung Jun panted heavily as he said in a quiet voice, "An 8-tailed fox? You're not the Yao King." The Fox Yao let out a cold laugh and said harshly, "You know who broke off one of my tails?" Hung Jun startled, and the Fox Yao suddenly opened its mouth, black fire billowing upwards to the heavens, creating a sudden whirlwind that swallowed Hung Jun, but Hung Jun flicked out the pentacolored sacred light, which opened up a barrier that protected the main hall of Huaqing Palace. The black fire died out, and Hung Jun behind the barrier was wholly untouched. The Fox Yao stared blankly at Hung Jun, but Hung Jun said, "Fox Yao, let me ask you something. How did you get to know my dad?" That Fox Yao laughed coldly. "You think you're fit to ask things of me? Bastard of that bastard Chong Ming!" Hung Jun angrily shouted, "You're not allowed to slander my dad." Hung Jun was in a great rage, and he put together the immortal slaying throwing knives in his right hand, combining them into one. The power of wind, lightning, earth, and fire exploded outwards, and the blades themselves extended endlessly, turning into a glaive almost 6 chi long. In that instant, the glaive glowed with light, and the Fox Yao flew into a shocked rage as it shouted, "It's this blade again dash!" The Fox Yao pounced towards Hung Jun, and the azure jade peacock plume in his left hand instantly turned into a shield of light, heartily blocking the Fox Yao's sharp clawed swipe. With a huge wing, energy exploded outwards, causing that Fox Yao's almost 3 jong tall huge body to spring outwards, before Hung Jun's right hand dipped the glaive down then flicked it upwards. The Fox Yao let out a pained wail, and with its body in midair, it let loose a burst of black flame. But that glaive seemed to rip open the space, and the air glowed with ripples as the black flames were torn apart like a sheet of paper in the next instant. Space, under the power of the glaive, was crushed into pieces, and the blade shaved away layer after layer as it cut through. The tail of the Fox Yao's 8 that was closest to the side split off from its base under that uncontrollable power like paper paste, and purple-black blood spurted out. Hung Jun let out another loud shout, waving his glaive a second time. Terror appeared in the Fox Yao's eyes, and with a turn, it landed on the ground. The second blow missed its target, but its momentum was still there, and the dislocation of space caused the entire Huaqing Palace to shift. With a huge boom, it collapsed in on itself, before that blade chi sliced past the side palace, flying towards the forest outside of the palace proper. That area's trees collapsed, and huge rocks slid down, carrying with them one of the smaller summits of the mountains as a landslide started. The loud booms didn't cease as a good portion of the cliffside collapsed at once, sliding down into the deep gorge below Mt. Li. When the rest of them caught up, they just managed to catch sight of the side palace and the cliffside collapsing, and they were all entirely dumbfounded. This, Li Jinglong said. Hung Jun? What magic did you use? Hung Jun held tightly onto his knife as he panted non-stop, saying, First she cursed out my dad. Quick, chase after her. A Tai shouted as he came back to himself. Aside from Li Jinglong and A Tai, who were relatively fresh, the rest of them had already depleted all their energy. Seeing that the 8-tailed fox had become a 7-tailed fox, bleeding heavily as it stumbled into the back hall, the two of them hurried to chase after it. Wait, Hung Jun shouted. We've got to break off each of its tails, otherwise we won't be able to get rid of it, wait. Zhenshi. If it was as usual, then after combining the immortal slaying throwing knives into one, Hung Jun would still be able to hold out for a second, but having been wounded on top of having his chi sucked away by Yaoguai, he was now already completely exhausted, and he almost couldn't stay upright. Let's go. Mo-Rijin grabbed him and ran after them with swift steps. Within the back palace, the wind blew the gauzy curtains. Yang Yahuan was currently waiting anxiously within the palace, but what came in was a wounded, huge, grey-colored fox. Yang Yahuan startled, and she asked tremblingly, "Big sister?" Before, at the walking pool, she had not had a chance to see it closely before she had been dragged along by Li Longji to go back to the palace and hide, and was commanded that no matter what, she could not come out. When she heard the sounds of fighting and the loud booms outside, Yang Yahuan felt that something was wrong, but she hadn't expected that what would come rushing in was actually a huge fox. Just now, she had seen Li Jinglong and them attack Lady Qiaoqiao together, and at that time Yang Yahuan had already dimly guessed it, but no matter what she couldn't believe it. The huge fox in front of her now was actually the big sister that she had interacted with daily. That fox Yao slowly walked towards Yang Yahuan, its eyes filled with tears. Yang Yahuan couldn't stop breathing heavily as she lifted a hand, trembling as she touched it. The fox Yao lowered its head, pressing the tip of its nose gently to Yang Yahuan's hand. "Little sister," from its eyes, large tears slid down, and its voice held a sliver of a sob. "Whence will it be possible?" Everyone arrived in pursuit, and Li Longji pushed his way out of the crowd. Yang Yahuan turned and looked towards Li Longji, whose eyes were filled with shock. Hung Jun managed to stand up straight, holding the glaive in his hand, but the fox Yao let out a low roar, its eyes glowing red. Yang Yahuan's gaze flickered, and Li Jinglong shouted, "Not good." Just as the carp Yao was about to rush up and scatter Lihun pollen, the fox Yao moved faster than any of them. With one bite, it picked up a dazed Yang Yahuan in its mouth, and Li Longji let out a sorrowful wail. "Beloved consort dash!" Yang Yahuan acted as if she hadn't heard him as she dangled from the fox Yao's mouth. The fox Yao smashed through the wall of the rear palace, racing out. Everyone sprinted to the front of the rear palace, only to see the fox Yao rushing out of the trees. Its grey fur blended in with the forested mountain, and it vanished into the night. Li Jinglong. Li Longji pressed a hand against the wall for support as he breathed harshly. Suddenly his knees gave out, and he almost knelt down. Li Jinglong hurried to lift him up and drag him back. Everyone looked at each other. Hung Jun had already expended all his energy, so he sat down on the ground and asked, "Now what should we do?" The hot springs palace, the side palace, the main hall, and the rear palace all looked as if a tornado had swept through them. They were destroyed to the point of disrepair, and with this, the exorcism department had also grandiosely become the #1 building demolishing division in all of the Great Tang. Wherever they went, they demolished buildings, and seeing that this was a trouble that his own squad had caused, Li Jinglong had no temper to display at all. His only hope was for the emperor to not forget the "destroy as you please" that he had said earlier. "You all, tell Zhen, what exactly happened?" Li Longji asked. His hair was in wild disarray, and his feet were bare as he sat down in the midst of a pile of broken rubble. "Your Majesty, the Shenwu troops came over to receive their orders," and Li Longji's imperial countenance flew into a great rage as he bellowed, "All of you, get out of Zhen's sight! Trash! What's the point of keeping you around?" "Your Majesty, please understand," Li Jinglong cupped his hands and bowed as he responded. "It has nothing to do with them. The power of the fox Yao is exactly to bewitch." Hung Jun leaned up against a pillar, only feeling that he was both hungry and thirsty, and he said, "That the mortals didn't even start killing each other is a pretty good result, so you shouldn't be so negative." Li Longji asked, "Since you had already discovered that Lady Qiaoqiao was a Yao, why did you not say so?" Li Jinglong answered helplessly, "If I had any other alternative, then I would not have wanted to take such great risks at such a time." And saying this, Li Jinglong reported all of the findings they had from their investigations these few days to Li Longji, and in Li Longji's gaze appeared a sense of horror. Everyone was silent as they watched Li Longji. Last time when Hung Jun had seen Li Longji, he hadn't noticed, but this time when he saw him again, he only felt that the emperor was very old. Li Longji was already 66, the marks of age on his face were very visible, and he looked old and dejected. The entire squad of the exorcism department, Li Longji replied, will return to Chang'an with Zhen. Have the messengers go forth and pass on orders to the 6 armies for them to go out of the city and find where the imperial concubine has been taken, and there will be no stopping until her person is found. Li Jinglong, you go retrieve the armor that Zhen left in Huaqing Palace. Half a shishan later, amidst the clanking of armor, night fell as a forest of torches rose. Everyone was resting. Hung Jun was both hungry and thirsty, but thankfully Huaqing Palace was not lacking in food that had been prepared for the emperor. Under the darkness of the night, he was eating who knows what, and after wolfing it all down, he finally felt somewhat better. Go back Ba, Li Jinglong said as he passed by Hung Jun. When we get back to Chang'an, eat then. Li Longji wore the emperor's dragon armor on him, which glittered with golden splendor. Li Jinglong followed along behind, wearing a set of black armor, pushing his helmet up a little, revealing his handsome face. A messenger raced over on his horse, into Huaqing Palace, shouting, reporting dash. Li Longji said darkly, speak. The messenger shot a glance at Li Jinglong and the people behind him, but Li Longji roared angrily, speak. Otherwise it's off with your head. Hung Jun started, and he thought, though the human emperor was old, that power was still there. As expected, the Ziwei star had the ability to suppress others. Chang'an is covered by black qi, the messenger gasped out. The city gates can't be opened, they've all been bewitched. When they heard this, everyone felt a chill run up their spines. Was Lady Qiaoqiao this daring, to actually escape into Chang'an? Li Longji turned his head and looked towards Li Jinglong, who could only press on boldly, perhaps it's exactly as your majesty suspects. In the terror that blanketed them in a dead silence, Li Longji's voice trembled. It is really this audacious, does that Fox Yao think that Zhen has no way to deal with it? Everyone's hearts were uneasy, and none of them dared to follow up this statement. After a long while, Li Longji walked, step by step, out of Huaqing Palace, still a little short on breath. Braziers had been lit outside the hall, and there were still a few stray soldiers who hadn't yet been woken by the Lihun pollen. As soon as the Fox Yao's power had dissipated, everyone had started discussing things, and they had vaguely guessed what had happened for Huaqing Palace to be in this state of destruction. Since the Shenwu army had caused such a ruckus, they didn't dare to make a sound, all of them kneeling on the ground, waiting for the emperor to deal with them. Li Longji stood on the plaza in front of Huaqing Palace and was silent for a long time. Afterwards, he said, "Where are the messengers?" "Here," the messengers all stepped out. "Go at the fastest speed to Luoyang to Guozi," Li Longji said. "And towards Tong Pass, to Gishuhan. Have them gather their armies and come to the outside of Chang'an to fulfill their duty to their lord." Li Jinglong's expression changed. "Your Majesty, can we rely on only all of you to break through Chang'an on your own?" Li Longji said coldly. "Your Majesty," Li Jinglong said, "as soon as the troops are called back from Luoyang and Tong Pass, then perhaps the battle situation there will change. This subject is willing to give it a try." Li Longji turned his head to look at Li Jinglong, and after exchanging a brief glance, Li Jinglong nodded. When Li Longji once again looked towards the members of the exorcism department, none of them dared to make a sound. Li Jinglong waved his hand, indicating that they go over, and after a brief discussion, Hung Jun lifted his head to look at Li Longji. "We can help you save your wife," Hung Jun said, "Emperor." Shhm Origin hurried to gesture for Hung Jun to be quiet. Hung Jun had always felt that Yang Guifei was a good person, and since she wasn't a fox Yao, a heavy stone in his heart fell to the ground. Then, do you all require rest? Li Longji said. Li Jinglong responded, no need for a rapid march, as long as we arrive at Chang'an before dawn, then it will do. Li Longji shouted, Shenwu army, hear my orders. Move out. At the third gang, 2,000 Shenwu troops left Mt. Li, turning back towards Chang'an. The members of the exorcism department kicked their horses into a gallop, making their own way forth. Hung Jun spurred his horse forward and caught up, asking Li Jinglong, Zhenqi, did you want to get in from the waterway outside of the city moat? Li Jinglong nodded, before asking Hung Jun, you're sure that the heart lamp can break through the fox Yao's magic? Maybe. Hung Jun didn't dare to be too certain as he responded. You may not be able to bear it. Previously, the group had personally seen the power of Li Jinglong's heart lamp in the cave, even the sons of the dragon were killed when that light shone down on them. Their Yao energy had been almost wholly exorcised, before they were incinerated entirely, and the power that burst out then could almost destroy even the intangible. When it came to exorcism magics, the things that exorcists were most afraid of were intangible things, because the fox Yao's bewitchment and the resentment collected by vengeful souls was not something that the pentacolor sacred light could block, not something that the landscape brush could seal, not something that the seven-nailed arrows could pierce, not something that the godly hurricane fan could sweep away. But the heart lamp might work. But they had no more time to experiment with it any further. Chu Yongxi was the first to bring this idea up when they were having their discussion, and everyone agreed that they would try it first, and if it didn't work, then they'd just retreat back outside of the city to try and think of other methods. Origin even brought up the idea that no matter how powerful the Fox Yao was, causing their own people to change sides would definitely use up its vital energy. Once or twice might work, but would it be able to control thousands of people, or even the 600,000 families in Chang'an, forever? It was always worth a try. Change horses ba, Li Jinglong said. Hung Jun, you come here. The two steeds pressed a little closer together, and with a turn of his body, Hung Jun flipped onto the horse's back, sitting behind Li Jinglong. Though your throwing knives are somewhat formidable, Li Jinglong pushed up his helmet, turning his head, they consume too much of your energy and cause a lot of destruction, so you can't use them rashly. The emperor said we could destroy as we pleased, Hung Jun pouted. Li Jinglong said, you still have to be a little more careful, otherwise with this slash, even if it was our own people, they would still be split into two, which is too horrifying. Hung Jun ed. That night, when he had chased Fei Ao out of the city, he didn't dare to use it carelessly, because he was afraid that one slash would cut all of Chang'an city into two halves. Teach me, how is the heart lamp supposed to be used? Let me try it first, Hung Jun replied. He grasped the azure jade peacock plume in his hand, activating the pentacolor sacred light. He wrapped his arms around Li Jinglong's strong waist, his hands overlapping one another as he pressed them against his chest. In that instant, under the icy cold clanking armor that Li Jinglong wore, that heart beat powerfully in his warm body. The pentacolor sacred light passed through Li Jinglong's chest, entering his meridians, and Li Jinglong felt his blood and qi instantly begin to roil, and it was very hard to bear. But as soon as the godly light entered him, it retreated again. Hung Jun had already sensed the blazing light being emitted from near Li Jinglong's heart, blocking the entry of the pentacolor sacred light. That light was extremely slow as it meandered through the meridians of his entire body. It's there. Hung Jun said. Can you feel it? Li Jinglong ed. Ever since they had escaped from the blood pool, he could more or less feel that the heart lamp had already begun to protect him, but the unforeseen events afterwards had happened too rapidly, and he hadn't had a chance to practice and grow accustomed to it. Hung Jun hugged Li Jinglong from behind, pressing one hand against his chest as he said, first is to gather the mana in the body, leading the power of the heart lamp along the Shayin channel of the arm upwards, passing through the Yan and Yuan Chuan nerves, traveling into the right hand. As Heng Jun explained, he used his finger, on the outside of the armor, starting from the left side of his chest, to trace over the right half of his body. When Li Jinglong studied martial arts, he had generally learned the locations of the channels, but still, to confirm, he undid his armor and tugged Heng Jun's left hand over, using it to trace over the meridian channel on his body, asking, "Is this it?" "Yes." Heng Jun grasped Li Jinglong's right hand, and Li Jinglong loosened his grip on them as his large palm pressed down on Heng Jun's right hand, interlacing their fingers. Heng Jun's heart began to beat violently, and he suddenly felt the warm glow in his hand flash. "I got it," Li Jinglong smiled. "Thanks, little Shifu." Heng Jun, ah! Li Jinglong's fingers tightened a little more around his own, before letting go. He said, "In the coming days I'll definitely practice well." This was the first time Heng Jun had someone interweave their fingers with his like this, and his face instantly flushed red. What Li Jinglong had done just now caused him to suddenly feel that between the two of them, some complicated emotion that they tacitly understood had arisen. Grip your sword and try it." Heng Jun then said. "It's on the saddle," Li Jinglong answered. "Hand it over to me." As the horse galloped onwards, Heng Jun plucked off the sword of wisdom on the saddle, and Li Jinglong transferred the power of the heart lamp to his hand. Heng Jun said, "Release it, and send it into the sword. You can do it." In the dark night, more than 2,000 steeds cantered on. Li Jinglong sent the power of the heart lamp into the sword of wisdom, and instantly the sword in his hand let off a brilliant light, which soon split open the heavens and the earth, as if it was a lighthouse in the dark night, immediately shining brightly. The Shenwu troops let out cries of surprise, and the other members of the exorcism department raced up, shouting, "Zhenqi, well done! Wow! Zhenqi's more than he looks. Zhenqi's glowing!" Heng Jun said, smiling towards the rest of them. "Li Jinglong!" Heng Jun's words roused a wave of laughter, and Li Jinglong didn't know if he should laugh or cry. He turned his head and asked, "Just this?" Heng Jun answered, "I only know this one move, Chongming only taught me this one. For the rest, we'll have to slowly figure it out later." Li Jinglong said, "It'll do. Brothers, let's go." The horses whinnied as they rushed towards the city of Chang'an blanketed in the night. It was the fifth gang, right before daybreak, and the Guanzhong plains sank into dense darkness. End chapter. Legend of Exorcism. Chapter 36. A Chang'an filled with Yao. In a pond connected to the city moat, everyone sloshed out of the water. "We'll need to find a time to seal up this place later," Li Jinglong said, "or it'll be too dangerous." Heng Jun, Mo Rijin, and Chu Yangxi were all panting. Back in the cave, they had recovered less than half of their strength, and after the hard, head-on battle at Huaqing Palace, they still hadn't yet recovered what they had consumed. Only A Tai was still energetic. "Rest a little," Li Jinglong insisted. The Carpiao walked out of the tunnel and peered out. Within the city of Chang'an, a light rain pattered down, carrying with it a faint whiff of blood. "What kind of rain is this?" the Carpiao asked. Li Jinglong came out as well, spreading his hand open. The light rain carried with it crimson-red droplets that gathered in his palm, and with a slight application of the heart lamp's energy, the rainwater turned into steam under the white light, vaporizing into the air. Everyone left the tunnel, and Li Jinglong asked, "How much have you all recovered?" "Half," Mo Rijin responded. "Chu Yangxi, half." 30%, Heng Jun replied. "Full," A Tai said readily. "Thanks for all your hard work, brothers," Li Jinglong said. "After this battle is over, let's go have a good vacation." "Where do you want to go?" Pingkong Li still. "Can we?" Heng Jun's spirits immediately lifted, and he said, "I want to go soak in that pool." When Hung Jun fell into a walking pool, he had felt that hot spring was comfortable beyond compare. There had even been fruits and chilled tea and such to the side, however, he hadn't had a chance to enjoy it because he had been dragged out too quickly. When the time comes, I'll try asking His Majesty, Li Jinglong responded, before reaching out a hand. His palm let off a warm, gentle white light, and Hung Jun placed his hand on it. The others all put their hands on top as well. Let the battle commence, Li Jinglong said. As he spoke, he grasped his long sword in his hand and sped towards the western gate. Their first target was the city gates. The entire city of Chang'an was asleep and enshrouded in silence. Yao energy pervaded the air, collecting into black clouds above the top of the palace before spreading off endlessly in all directions. The heights of the city gates were more silent than usual, and they were packed with city guards holding weapons. Why can that fox's Yao power spread through the entirety of Chang'an city? Hung Jun could not believe it. Even if it was Chongming, his Yao power would only be able to envelop Yaojin Palace. Because of the blood rain, Chu Yongxi responded. Li Jinglong said, use the Lihun pollen sparingly, don't scatter it all. Under the blood rain, the city guards were all in a daze. Origen ran over swiftly, drawing his bow and knocking an arrow to the string, and he swiftly loosed a succession of shafts. The guards up high fell without a sound, and the city walls were as quiet as ever even as those guards began to plummet down. For a while the arrows fell like rain, and Li Jinglong shouted, take the gate. Hung Jun hefted up the pentacolor sacred light, blocking the arrows that fell like a waterfall, before flicking out his immortal slaying throwing knives. Just as he was about to throw them, Chu Yongxi let out a loud shout. Yaogwai! Behind him, two huge fish covered with scales burst out from the canal. As soon as the carpiao saw its natural enemy, it was so scared it shouted and leapt into Chu Yongxi's arms. Chu Yongxi held the carpiao in his arms as he, also scared out of his wits, began to run in Hung Jun's direction. Aren't you not afraid of Fox Yao? A Tai roared angrily. I'm afraid of these weird-looking Yaogwai. Chu Yongxi shouted. Block it, quick! With a shake of his body, Origen changed forms, shape-shifting into the grey wolf. Leaping forward, he tackled the huge fish back into the water. Clearly, Lady Kuokuo had long since expected that they would come, and she had many Yaogwai hide in the sewers under the city. The two fish Yao guarding the gates were called Chiru, and Li Jinglong had read about them in the book that Di Renja had composed when he was alive. He shouted, pierce their gills. Hung Jun! You continue forward. Everyone turned to face the path into the middle of the city. On the main street, more and more Yaogwai sensed that the city gates were under attack and they rushed over. Hung Jun waved the glaive in his hand, instantly sweeping the crowd flat, neatly slicing apart the metal chains. In the darkness, Li Longji had been waiting outside the city for a long time, when a series of muffled thumps echoed from behind the city gates. They're already here, Li Longji shouted. Men, follow Zhen and slaughter our enemies. Right after, with a thunderous, startling boom, the drawbridge crashed down. The sound of a roar traveled for hundreds of li, and in the next instant, the city gates gave way, smashing down heavily as well. Thousands of Yaogwai enveloped in black smoke rushed out of the city like thousands of wild horses galloping. Where did all of these come from? Hung Jun shouted amidst the chaos. There were Yao hidden within Chang'an, the grey wolf roared. Get up high, on the towers. Hung Jun threw out a grappling hook, and A Tai followed closely behind with a cyclone. Quite a few of the Yaogwai actually had wings, and when the cyclone came, they all rose into the air, opening their mouths and roaring as they spat out lightning fire bombs. The grey wolf that Origen had turned into leapt upwards, catching Hung Jun and bringing him along as he leapt up onto the wall. Right after, with a roll in mid-air, Origen turned back into a human. He landed in a kneel, one knee on the ground, as he drew his long bow and began to fire rapidly. Hung Jun lifted up the pentacolor sacred light, letting it envelop the gate tower and block the searing fire bombs that the troop up above shot down, while also sending out his own throwing knives. For an instant, the sky above the gate tower was filled with whistling arrows and glowing throwing knives, and the Yaogwai were scattered all about, but there were simply too many of them, and they kept rushing in a wave that blanketed the sky. "You all take care of the ones in the sky!" Li Longji shouted loudly. "Men, follow me and charge!" Right after that, the emperor led the Shenwu troops in a brazen charge right through the city gates. The Yaogwai in the vanguard had low cultivation levels, and under the forceful charge of these 2,000 humans into the city, they were all squashed underfoot. Li Jinglong roared, "Push forwards!" In that instant, a light flashed outside of the city gates, and the Yaogwai flying in the air let out pained cries. A Tai sent a whirlwind their way, and right afterwards, Hung Jun gathered all his strength and sent a slash flying towards the sky. That slash swooshed over, and in that moment, everything was compressed, torn, and broken under the light of that arc. Hundreds of flying beasts were mercilessly torn apart, and their blood exploded over the sky. "Follow me," the grey wolf howled. The group rushed over the city gates, vaulting onto their horses. Li Jinglong ignited the heart lamp in his palm, and the sword of wisdom exploded with strong light that rushed down the main street. In the face of the sword of wisdom, the black energy retreated relentlessly. Li Longji, riding alone, charged forward at the head of 2,000 plus troops. The two sides of the street were filled with Yao, which numbered in the tens of thousands, and they streamed endlessly out of the houses. "How have so many Yaogwai appeared in Chang'an?" Li Longji roared. "Responding to your majesty." Origin passed by Li Longji, using his 7-nailed arrows to shoot a pig Yao that leapt towards them to its death, answering, "These are all Yao tribes that have been hiding within Chang'an. But they aren't that powerful." A Tai rushed by on the right, and with a wave of his fan, he sent 2 snake Yao flying. "I can tell." Li Longji hadn't yet fully recovered from his shock, but he had already begun to feel relieved. "So you fight them, ba?" Hung Jun galloped over, shouting, "Emperor! You have the protection of the Ziwei Star, so defeating a bunch of weak Yao is no problem. We're going on ahead." Li Longji. After the group broke through the main street, they followed Li Jinglong in pushing the battlefront forwards. The war horses cantered on through the darkness of the night, and Li Jinglong held the sword straight out at his side as the horses continued to gallop forward. "Did you guys see?" Hung Jun asked. "It's filled with Yao," Chu Yangxi said. "Strange, why are they not fighting back?" The rooftops along the two sides of the western market were covered with Yao, hiding their forms within the black qi. All of the members of the exorcism department had noticed them. "Two possibilities," A Tai said, unperturbed. "One is that they're afraid of death and don't dare to lash out recklessly, 2 is that they know they can't beat us, so their target isn't us." Origin knocked an arrow to his bow on the back of his galloping horse, and an arrow flew over. Where the shaft landed, the Yao beasts hiding in ambush on the roof fled in every direction. "They're all low-level Yao tribes," Origin said, having tested it out. "They don't have a lot of fighting power. See, they're observing us from a distance." "Yao aren't like humans," the carp Yao spoke up from its position on Hung Jun's back. The carp Yao explained, "Humans pursue morality and justice, read of the 100 schools of thought, and respect the heavens, earth, sovereign, parents, and teachers. Yao don't have such things, they don't understand vassals dying if it pleases their lord for them to do so. They're just afraid of the Yao king's power, and usually they just listen to whoever is the strongest. So the power of the Yao king has become weak." Li Jinglong understood. For its control over them to be just this, compared with before. Chu Yangxi said, "Technically, the Chang'an Yao king should be a black Jiao, so how has it become an 8-tailed fox?" Hung Jun once again recalled the mission Changming had given him before he came down the mountain. Everyone was talking about a black Jiao, but where was the Jiao? How had the Yao king been switched out? The way I see it, perhaps it's run off, or it's been replaced. Li Jinglong then asked. How old is your information? When everyone thought about it, they found that that was pretty likely. Li Jinglong then said, having caused such a ruckus, there is no way the Yao King won't appear. I think, more likely than not, some internal affair happened amongst them, just like what Zhao Zilong said. Anyways, when we see her again, perhaps we'll know then. The speed of the war horses slowed slightly as they came in front of the Suand gate, and from behind the door came broken snatches of the sound of a pipa playing. Everything was quiet and calm, and in the depth of the night, the pipa's melody echoed extremely eerily through the darkness. Li Jinglong looked towards Xingqing Palace, filled with Yao energy, behind the door. He said, Everyone. Everyone pulled out their own artifacts. Hung Jun held the pentacolor sacred light and the glaive, becoming the one leading the charge. Li Jinglong pressed a hand on Hung Jun's shoulder, standing in front of him, saying slowly, Don't always rush to the very front. And after saying this, Li Jinglong pulled out his sword of wisdom, and he sucked in a deep breath. 17th day of the 11th month, 12th year of the Tianbao era. Case: suppress the revolt and assist the emperor. Difficulty: God level. Location: Xingqing Palace. Involved persons: Lady Qiuoqiu, Imperial Consort Yang, Li Longji. Case details. On the night of the 16th day of the 11th month, Lady Qiuoqiu revealed her original form, that of the nine-tailed fox Yao King, Wu Qiu, who had been hiding in Chang'an for many years. She first destroyed Huaqing Palace and took Imperial Consort Yang as a hostage, before casting her evil magic over Chang'an, mobilizing the Yaoguai in an attempt to overthrow the rule of my great Tang dynasty. It is crucial to save the hostage, Imperial Consort Yang, and eliminate the Yao King. Remuneration: His Majesty will definitely grant a hefty reward. Attack. With Li Jinglong's loud cry, the glaive in Hung Jun's hand slashed twice, and space collapsed. The Suand gate and the decorated archway it rested in was cut into a cross shape, and the near 10,000 Jin metal door was cut apart like tofu, collapsing to two sides and letting out a huge sound as the pieces fell to the ground. Behind the Suand gate, within the plaza, sat a woman wearing a long gown. The cross-shaped slash swept by, the intersection point just skimming her temple, bringing with it a light breeze, and a few ebony strands fell from the woman's hair. I've long since heard of the fame of the Great Tang Exorcism Department's members. The pipa stopped, and the woman said mellowly, This woman's name is Xian Yin, we meet again. You are, Hung Jun froze in shock. That girl was the pipa player, Xian Yin, from Pingkong Li's Nightingale of the Spring Dawn. At this moment, her wandering, mirth-filled gaze settled on Hung Jun. I wonder, how does my skill at the pipa compare with Li Guinian's? Xian Yin said. At this time, the plaza was filled with soldiers, the left and right Longwu, Shenwu, and Yulin troops. The 6 armies had all assembled, all of the troops wholly expressionless as the rainwater mixed with blood floated in the air. The one leading those Longwu troops was actually Hu Sheng. This is you wanting us to kill people, Li Jinglong said quietly, holding his sword of wisdom as he walked forward. Evil Yao, why don't you guess, will I kill them, or not kill them? Xian Yin smiled prettily. Captain Li, your sword of wisdom can only break devil chi, and as I do not have a heart devil, it has no effect against me. I, however, want to see if you can break through Wu Qiudaren's magic. And saying this, Xian Yin's 5 fingers strummed the pipa, and music thundered forth. Hoi! The 6 armies pulled out their weapons at once, pointing them towards the outside of the Suand Gate Plaza. Slowly stepping forward, they tightened the circle around them. Li Jinglong said, Xian Yin Guniang, you shouldn't have been playing in Pingkong Li. Lady Qiuoqiu really does not understand the concept of using her resources wisely. Then what should she have been doing? Hung Jun asked curiously. Training the 6 armies, Li Jinglong said mildly. Ever since the 6 armies were founded, they've each only minded their own business, and never before have they formed such a tidy arrangement of troops like this one. Sighed with His Majesty B.A., Miss. Everyone couldn't help laughing loudly, and for a moment Xianyin couldn't summon up a breath to speak from rage. Just as she was about to respond, Li Jinglong pinpointed that very instant, and he shouted, "Go!" Tai and Mo Rijin were the fastest, and the magic bombs and the 7-nailed arrows shot out in an instant. Xianyin's pipa paused, but she couldn't direct the soldiers to block in time, so she could only jump up into the air. With this, Li Jinglong and Hung Jun then led the charge over. Xianyin's body hovered in midair, and with a wave of her pipa, the guards of the 6 armies all drew their bows, and a hail of arrows flew into the air. Just as Hung Jun was about to block the arrows, Li Jinglong grabbed his collar and shouted, "Head in!" Hung Jun hadn't had the time to react yet when he and Li Jinglong rushed past the stairs. Li Jinglong broke shoulder first into the main hall of Xingqing Palace, shouting, "We're leaving it up to you guys." Mo Rijin, Chu Yongxi, and Tai all made noises of agreement. Xianyin's expression changed, and she turned her head back as if she was about to give chase, but she could only land because multiple arrows of Mo Rijin's flew at her. She had exerted a great amount of effort to control the 20,000 troops of the 6 armies, and if she were to give up this place, then it would be akin to throwing away all her previous efforts. Li Jinglong! Xianyin flew into a rage. The Carpiao raced over in a flash, and with a fierce wave of his fan, Tai sent the Carpiao flying into the air, where the Carpiao shouted, "Lay down the butcher knife and immediately become a Buddha dash." "Why do you shout something different every time?" Chu Yongxi chuckled. Right after, it scattered the contents of that silk bag containing Lihun pollen like a fairy scattering flowers. Within the wild wind, the Lihun pollen dispersed over the entirety of the courtyard thanks to that cyclone. The guards all began to sneeze violently as they stared at each other, and the first to recover was actually Hu Sheng. "Where is this?" Hu Sheng froze in shock. Even though the amount of Lihun pollen was limited in the end, the cyclone had swept it over almost half of the 6 armies, releasing nearly 7,000 people from the enchantment's hold. The Carpiao hugged that small silk bag to itself as it fell onto the roof tiles, and its feet kicked wildly for a little as it almost slid down, before it managed to steady itself and ran towards the depths of Xingqing Palace. Xianyin immediately lifted up the pipa again, but Tai lifted the barbet lute in his hand, sitting down on the wall. His fingers strummed over the strings, and the power within their music collided as the sound waves clashed, reverberating over the courtyard. Hu Sheng roared, "Who can tell me what exactly happened?" Xianyin gritted her teeth as she continued to emit the power of her pipa, and the more she urged it on, the more anxious she became. But as Tai's music interfered, she had no way to get the soldiers that had been awakened by the Lihun pollen to once again fall under her control. Xianyin's fingers moved faster and faster as she played the song of the Qin King breaking the battle formation, but this didn't seem to affect Tai at all, and he began to play the melody of the white feathered garment, composed personally by Li Longji. Xianyin had finally met a formidable opponent. Her pipa's melody ebbed and flowed, the chords repeating like broken stones and shattered jade. Tai immediately grasped the empty gaps in his opponent's melody, and he used his ethereal melody to scramble Xianyin's rhythm. "Commander Hu Sheng!" Chu Yongxi shouted. "Gather your subordinates, quickly!" There were 20,000 members of the 6 armies on the plaza, and their heads spun as they listened to the hurricane-like melodies. Hu Sheng let out a loud shout, covering his own ears as he managed to run towards them. Mo Rijin drew his bow and knocked an arrow as Chu Yongxi gripped his artifact tightly, both of them staring attentively at Xianyin with anxiety. Tai and Xianyin were surrounded by a glow, and the melodies flew wave after wave back and forth. In the end, it was as if they had taken on a tangible form as they collided endlessly in the air, causing an explosion. Li Jinglong and Hung Jun ran into Xingqing Palace, both of them panting slightly. "Zhenqi, you're so smart. No need to flatter me at a time like this." I'm speaking from my heart. Hung Jun followed Li Jinglong in rushing through room after room of the main hall. Li Jinglong was afraid that they'd run into a eunuch or a palace maid at any point, but thankfully there were none. Where was Lady Qiaoqiao hiding? Why don't you use the heart lamp? Since she said it like that, then she wants me to use it, Li Jinglong answered as he rapidly passed through the side hall's corridor. Though I don't know why things are like this, being a little more careful is always a good thing. Wait, Hung Jun said, I keep feeling that something's not right. Xingqing Palace was devoid of any living person. There was only the sound of their own footsteps, taking one step at a time. Every time you have this kind of feeling, Li Jinglong said simply, the one who falls prey to bad luck afterwards is always me. Hung Jun. The Fox Yao had hidden her tracks well, hiding who knows where within Xingqing Palace. Dawn had already come upon them without any fanfare as the rain pattered down, dripping down along the eaves of the roofs. Today, the once flourishing imperial court was sunk into a patch of dead silence. The viscous blood slowly seeped downwards along the lacquered pillars, the walls, and the horizontal roof beams. Under the dim sunlight, blood swelled over the window frames, wall murals, and palace lights, surrounding the hall the two of them were in. Hung Jun unconsciously held out the pentacolor sacred light. Just as Li Jinglong was going to tell him to not be too nervous, the blood wildly rushed towards them from all directions. Watch out! The sea of blood suddenly curved downwards, and the four walls temporarily became waterfalls. Hung Jun immediately used the pentacolor sacred light to envelop the two of them, but this time the sea of blood came down in full force, and the two of them were swallowed by it as they were furiously pressed together. With one hand, Li Jinglong grabbed Hung Jun as he was also squeezed into the middle, before both of them were dragged into floating in the blood. The heart lamp. There's blood everywhere. I can't let it out. Li Jinglong and Hung Jun were encased in the pentacolor sacred light, like a glowing cocoon within a dark red tank of water. More and more blood cascaded down and grew heavier and heavier. Li Jinglong did his best to release the power of the heart lamp, but though the heart lamp pierced through the sea of blood with its light, it had no way to oppose this massive amount of fluid. The boundary of the pentacolor sacred light shrank closer and closer under the influence of the outside pressure until the two of them were tightly wrapped up, pressed tightly against each other. Hung Jun couldn't even uncurl his fingers, and he gritted his teeth and said, "You're squishing my hand." Li Jinglong struggled mightily and managed to move aside a little, and Hung Jun lifted his glaive, sending a single slash off. But though that slash broke through the sea of blood, the flowing liquid quickly congealed back together. Hung Jun's breath grew difficult, though the pentacolor sacred light was there to block the liquid, air was almost unable to pass through as a result. Li Jinglong forced his elbow to the side. The two of them, heads down and feet up, had almost no way to use their strength, dangling as they were in midair. Outside, in the courtyard of Xingqing Palace, Atai and Xuanyan's melodies clashed like a stormy tempest. At the instant that the song of the Qin King breaking the battle formation reached its climax, Atai used his hand to silence the strings, before with a strum, his lute suddenly rang with sound. All of the barbet lute strings vibrated at the same time, letting out a sound that would split mountains and crack rocks. With a loud boom, all of the people on the courtyard jolted at the same time. A chance! Chu Yongxi waved his large brush, and on the training grounds in front of the Suand Gate, all of the carvings leapt off the cobblestones. The large Suanwu imprint in the middle of the grounds rose up, turning with a boom, knocking the soldiers of the 6 armies over. Origin turned in mid-air, shooting out his 7 arrows before turning into the grey wolf, using the path that the Suanwu had opened up to bolt after those swift arrows. Xuanyan tried to once again call upon the power of her pipa, but the reverberations from Atai had injured her meridians. She turned and leapt away, dodging the arrow shafts that Origin shot, but in the end she couldn't escape the grey wolf that rushed right in front of her. Xuanyan was already wary, but the grey wolf didn't have any intention of having compassion towards a delicate woman, and with one bite, he got her around the waist. Xuan Yin's blood spurted out where those sharp teeth dug in, tainting the grey wolf's mouth. With a pained cry, she turned into her original form of a jade pipa, almost breaking Emorigin's canines. Emorigin felt pain, and with a shake of his head, tossed the jade pipa out. That pipa struck the marble steps, letting out thuds as it fell down the stairs and smashed into pieces. Xuan Yin's body perished, and in that instant, the Yao's layers upon layers of power collapsed. Li Longji finally rushed to the scene, and he let out an angry roar. Where are the 6 armies? In the courtyard, the awakened soldiers stared at each other, none of them knowing what had happened. When they were roared at by Li Longji, they instantly began to tremble. Follow me to Xingqing Palace to save the imperial concubine. If anyone can save the imperial concubine, they will be heavily rewarded. End chapter.